Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, and thank you for everyone joining us for the session of the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute's webinar series. My name is Dr. Jeff Dusek. I'm the Director of Outcomes Research at the UCI Samueli Integrative Health Institute and Professor in Residence for the University of Irvine, California Irvine Department of Medicine. I'm happy to moderate this session of the SSIHI's Research Webinar series. Before we start, I want to review a few Zoom housekeeping rules and items. This session is being recorded. We will send all registrants the link to the recording. I'll post the link on the event webpage. Everyone will remain muted to limit distractions. Please communicate with us, including submitting any questions in the Q&A feature on the bottom of your screen. And we'll hold any Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The Samueli Institute is committed to whole person health research, education, and clinical care. Our interdisciplinary researchers are dedicated to exploring the science of disease prevention and treatment. We bring this series to you to share the promising integrative health research that is occurring through the Institute's pilot studies grants and Samueli Scholar Awards. To date, the Institute has supported 25 investigations, with the potential to enhance our understanding of integrative practices. For more information, please visit our website, scihi.uci.edu. All right, we'll start the video. Today we have the pleasure of having two speakers today. First, we have Dr. Wray, who is a professor of dance at UC Irvine. She's also the custodian of Embodiology, an award-winning Neo-African improvisation as residence practice. Redefining practices for human flourishing, Dr. Wray is a fellow of the Mind and Life Institute and a California established artist awardee, with a 30-year career performing with the London Contemporary Dance Theatre and the Rampart Dance Company. She's advanced the integration of music and dance through jazz exchange, working with artists such as Winston Marsalis, Ahmed Farron, and Nicole Mitchell. Her scholarly work is rooted in practice-based research in Kapela Village, Ghana. Dr. Wray's monograph, Embodiology from Ancient Movement and Music Practices to Phenomenal Being, is forthcoming on the Routledge publication. She's a 2024 UCI Newkirk Center for Science and Society Faculty Fellow. Dr. Wray will be co-presenting with Dr. Bounds, an associate professor in the UCI Susan and Bill Gross School of Nursing and director of Centering Youth and Families for Empowerment and Resilience, the CIPHER Lab. Her program of research is focused on digital mental health promotion and the prevention of risk behaviors in adversity-impacted youth. Dr. Bounds is certified by the American Nurses Credentialing Center, ANCC, as a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner and has spent nearly 25 years working with youth and their families to promote mental health in the community. Please join me in welcoming Drs. Wray and Bounds in today's session.
Thank you, Dr. Dusek. So my name is Wray, and I'm here with my partner, Dawn Bounds. We are delighted to be here with you today to share the journey of STREAM, a pilot research project focusing on a goal to develop a movement practice that will support students to become more resilient, more empowered, and self-aware through movement. We'd first like to follow on with the next slide, which shares with you our collaborative team, our advisors, and our undergraduate and graduate researchers. You will see immediately that this is a highly interdisciplinary team that has really garnered the collaboration across the arts and sciences. So many of the students also have art and science backgrounds, and it is my hope that they will be the future of this research. So we would really amply like to acknowledge our collaborator, Dr. Monica Daly, who is the director of the Center for Integrative Movement Sciences, and also Dr. Joni Ricks-Odie, and also our support on the assessment side in terms of the data and statistics, Sang-Hui Shin. So thank you for the work that you have done. What we're sharing with you today is the preliminary research outcomes. The work continues, and our team of researchers and advisors are continuing on with this journey. So next slide, please. So speaking into the background of this project, why did we begin this journey? This project came into being on the other side of the pandemic. So just after we had seemingly returned to campus. And this pandemic, as we know, had a major impact on frontline healthcare workers. And we've all heard the term burnout, compassion fatigue, and the various levels of mental health challenges. And in many cases, students during that period were prematurely pulled away from their training, and they were then cast into the front line to help with those shortages. And we also know that during this time, students were challenged, and in various ways, those students from minoritized populations, that was compounded with feelings of disempowerment and less flexibility in terms of what we think of as resilience, being buoyancy and flexibility. Next slide, please. So we approach this study from the perspective of human flourishing. And we are drawing upon a movement practice that was derived of traditional ways of knowing. And it's well documented that elements of West African performance practices have been used in settings to support collective healing, such as the drum circle. And it's well documented that there are those therapeutic effects. But the other side of that drumming is the dance. And so we also know that within integrative health, there are several practices that emerge from the East, Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, that have been and continue to be used in support of self-regulation. And these modalities, again, have been examined scientifically. So these were the foundational pieces that informed us of the next step by including movement practices that emerge out of the African context. Next slide, please. So we began a study, a pilot study of a practice that is emerging that is called Embodiology. And Embodiology is both a philosophy of dynamic systems, and it's also a practice that has a method that is made from that philosophy. And so there was a study earlier in 2018 that was studying GI patients in which elements of embodiology as it was emerging were utilized. And during that study, it showed an increase in vitality through that SF36 health survey. And those patients in those very interactive, distinctly interactive parts and generative, creative parts of this movement class recognized and described the kinds of ways in which the social connection with others shifted their experience. Next slide. Thank you. So, embodiology, it's a practice that emerges from a particular space and place. And that particular space and place is Ghana, West Africa. And there's a particular community through which I conducted autoethnographic research over a number of years, and through that research began to apply practices research to working with other performers. In the beginning, the work was centered around art and art making. And so on this slide, you will see the various people and organizations within both the village context and Ghana and a larger context, the academic context, people that have informed this work and I consider to be custodians of indigenous knowledge and continue to support. And indeed, I do hope that they are engaged in this virtual presentation at this time. So you will see a range from the elders in what is a group called the Kinka to the children of the Kopea Village School. And as Embodiology grows, as do we give resources back to this community. It is vital that this work that is action-based and has a social responsibility, which is to acknowledge and give back resources to the community through which these ideas and practices emerged. Next slide, please. So the details, the inner of Embodiology. So there are 6 principles through which everything that I teach and the students and any participant is participating in. And these principles guide every decision that takes place in the space. The meta generator of this movement practice is a principle I call dynamic rhythm. And dynamic rhythm is accessible to us all, first and foremost, through our breath. So the breathing practice is where we begin. And through this connection to our capacity to regulate our breath, so too do we then have the capacity to connect into the sensory and the cognitive worlds that we are operating within, thereupon the social, the intrapersonal, and that wisdom from our bodies emerge. Next slide, please. So for this study, we were working virtually. Out of the pandemic, we were doing still a lot of work in that mode of presentation. And indeed, I had developed a whole level of embodiology practice through the virtual space. And indeed, through the Samueli Institute, there were a series of classes called Vitality in Motion. So I had developed a particular granular insight through teaching this work virtually. So in the context of stream, we dedicated 3 dimensions to each session. The first was focused on the breath work, and the second, what we call moving meditations, or sometimes breath sculpting. And then the third element, which is where we're getting into more of a creative problem-solving mode, we call rhythmic spatio puzzles. And through the work, the students also became familiar with terms like seselelama, which is an Anglo-Ewe term, translates to meaning knowing the world through the body. So indigenous knowledge meets cognitive embodied cognition, right? This is integral to their way of being. And so you see the picture in the middle of the left side of the screen. That's a musical instrument called a gakokwe. And this is the timekeeper. This is the polyrhythmic instrument that we use that's dual tone, that the students then became familiar with certain patterns that then became the foundation to certain exercises that we did. Next slide, please. So music was central, and I'll pass on to Dr. Bounds.
Thank you, Dr. Wray, for that beautiful introduction. And hopefully that introduction has centered you into this project. Due to my um, interest in self-regulation, particularly self-regulation and co-regulation with individuals who are under great stress, who have experienced adversity and trauma, I had the privilege of being introduced to Dr. Wray, and we set out together through funding from SSIHI to really explore how embodiology might be used to manage stress and promote flourishing through increasing self-regulation, empowerment, and community resilience, focused on our students here at UCI. And we started with individuals who came from minoritized backgrounds that were in the health sciences and STEM fields here at UCI. And so we set out to build a stream, and we did so through a virtual stress management course in Canvas that taught these principles of embodiology. We decided that we wanted to assess the feasibility, acceptability, and relevance to the students, and to also explore the preliminary impact on the students' well-being. Next slide, please. And so our study design, this is our flyer here. We set out to recruit 60 minoritized College of Health Sciences or STEM students here at UCI. And I'll share with you, we actually ended up having two phases of the study based upon engagement. But our initial design was a randomized controlled trial where we plan to randomly assign students to either stream or receive embodiology versus not receive anything. So standard care, sharing resources that were available to manage stress on campus. And so phase one is the randomized controlled trial. And then phase two was actually allowing the control group to also receive the intervention and take a second post-intervention survey. And so this design includes pre-post surveys for phase one. And then the second phase is an additional survey for the control group. We did provide incentives throughout their participation for their time. And so we incentivized the surveys. We also incentivized the attendance, including their participation in the live session, their participation in videoing themselves and uploading that, and also $30 for the post-intervention survey. Next slide. And so we were interested in their well-being, and we measured that through a variety of measures. We wanted to look at what their perceived stress looked like, as well as their mental health, along with emotional style and collective resilience. We also did weekly check-ins that were after session check-ins that really explored even during the sessions, there were polls along with after the session, what they liked about each of those sessions. And so we collected quite a bit of data from our students. Next slide, please. And so phase one included a 10-week course that was delivered over Canvas and via Zoom with Dr. Wray, and that took place in the winter quarter of 2022. And then because our participation in the stream session, so the intervention group engagement was low, we decided that we should also offer the embodiology sessions to our control group, who actually participation in control group was much higher. And so we said, hey, let's offer it to them as well. And so we did a second phase of a 10-week offering in the spring/summer. It did not coincide with the quarter, but each group were offered 8 embodiology sessions that were delivered over Zoom. Next slide, please. And so for data analysis, we looked at analyzing the data in 2 ways. One, we wanted to explore within group comparisons, and we did so through paired t-tests. And then, of course, we wanted to, really conduct this randomized controlled trial and look across groups. Did the intervention group differ in comparison to the control group? And we did that through t-tests. Next slide, please. And so here are our results. We had a total of 49 participants. In our control group, we had a total of 27 who completed a baseline assessment and 21 who completed a post-intervention assessment. And then, as I mentioned in phase 2, we also allowed them to attend the sessions over Zoom during the spring and the summer. And so of those in phase 2, 4 attended at least one session, and 3 of those participants attended at least 4 sessions or watched the recording that was available. Unfortunately, we did not have any student in the control or intervention group attend all 8 sessions that were offered. And then for phase 2, that second set of post-intervention surveys, we had 4 complete that, which were actually how many people participated in that phase 2 sessions. For our intervention group, we had slightly less participation. We had 22 completed baseline assessment. 9 of those participants actually attended 1 live session, and we had 5 that attended at least 4 or half of the sessions. And we ended up with 12 post-intervention surveys for our intervention group. And some of those were eliminated because we actually restricted this to UCI students only, and realized that we had some folks in there who actually were not from UCI, and so their data was eliminated. Next slide, please. And so this gives you a picture of who participated in both of our groups. And you can see that they were young adults around 23, mostly female, and they were diverse in terms of their sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and area of study. And of course, mostly that was health sciences and STEM, because that is who we targeted for recruitment into the study. Next slide, please. And so in terms of the results, as I shared earlier, we explored lots of different aspects of human flourishing and well-being, and in particular, mental health. And what we discovered was, out of all of that, with the data that we had, there was no difference between our control groups and our intervention groups. And this is just phase 1 of the study that I'm sharing. What we did discover, however, was that there was a statistically significant difference in the intervention group from baseline to post-intervention for post-traumatic stress disorder. And so we used the PTSD-5. As you can see, that red line is the clinical cutoff. So at 4, we had some folks that were at 4 or above. And as you can see, pre-post, no difference between the groups, but a statistically significant difference for the intervention group pre-post. Next slide, please. And I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Wray to continue.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Bounds. So included in our intervention were the videos that the students took within the sessions. So as mentioned earlier, we're in the virtual space, and the students themselves recorded themselves in motion. So at 2 intervals within the class, after we did the introduction to the breath work, we moved on to moving meditations. And that was typically a movement sequence that they learned, that they knew, that became something that was codified and were over time more and more practiced. So that was one of the sequences that they recorded each week. And the second was the movement puzzle. And the movement puzzle was a creative dimension of the class, which would be inspired and shaped by dynamic rhythm, by a spatial property or relationship, so their relationship to the space that they were in. It could be also an abstract idea that had to do with emotion or a type of play. For example, we would use imagery in some cases of everyday activity, which we would then amplify and then go on a journey to create a fractal. As you may have seen on that first diagram, there was a property called fractal code. And so we used this as a way of scaling the movement, using the central kernel of the idea, the creative idea, as I said, whether it was rhythmically focused, spatially, or using some type of imagery. And they would record that 2 to 3 minute section of the class. So we had the moving meditation recorded as a linear sequence, which we practiced week after week. And then we had the novel, creative, improvised action that they also created. Also important to say that during this movement class, coming from an African orientation, music is absolutely central to the pursuit of the, as I talked about, the tensible time, the way in which movement through time is felt and the amplitude of the movement expressed. So each week, the students had to submit their videos as well as submit their surveys. And the researchers created an ethogram using the ELAN software. And what they were measuring qualitatively were these 4 main areas: the quality of the action, their level of engagement, their energy, and their expressivity. So they were using the construction of the prompts or the sequence of movement, and they were being analyzed week to week against their own baseline. So each of the students were being tracked throughout the study. And there was, in many ways, a slightly artificial aspect of that, was that we don't normally do such a thing in a class, stop and record oneself, right? So that little step of artifice over time became less of an impediment. But we also know that doing this novel study, we had to create a way to examine the movement itself, because the relationship between the movement and their commitment and effort, how that then correlated with their surveys and the ways in which they were articulating their mental health. Did that correlate with their more expansive and more courageous and more projected movement? So that's what we are looking for as we go forwards with this movement analysis. Next slide, please. So also, as part of our data collection, there were questions related to the session that the students answered qualitatively. And some of these, and many of them, echo in many ways what led me to this study, which is what people say about embodiology. And so there was, I will just articulate a couple of these out loud. So during the week session, I respond to the breathing exercises greatly. I had come into the session with a lot of nervousness and anxiety. And after this session, it really allowed me to center myself and reconnect with my body. So there is a great deal being said in those 2 sentences. The ability to regulate our breath, well documented as being a cornerpiece of mental steadiness, being able to, whilst under pressure, regulate one's breath. And that's the part of the movement puzzle that is intentionally supported. So they're going into uncertainty because they are improvising, but we are still using our breath in a very dedicated way to set the nervous system in a sense of normality whilst exploring the unknown. And then another student said, I didn't like meditating in front of individuals or on camera, so I did not participate. So that's an important piece of our learning, to understand that what it is for some people is very different for others. So in session 2, someone shared, I felt a deeper connection to the space I was in during the moving meditation exercise. And so why is that important? Place where we are matters. Our environments change, and so can our disposition at the same time shift. But again, through the exercises, she was able to feel a richer and more potent connection to the space that they were in. Session 4. The sessions helped me to rediscover my passion for life and desire to connect with my community. It is like something within me has been rejuvenated. It's an amazing feeling. So how this showed into the other forms of data, I am not at liberty to know, but such an expression of self-awareness is indicative of something specific that's going on in this work that we're hoping to pinpoint even further. Next slide, please. So session 5, I just wanted to say I look forward to our sessions every week. So we're more than halfway through the study, still a lot of enthusiasm. I was very stressed today, and I'm glad I get to benefit from this program. Session 6. I like that we are moving into more complex movement puzzles that challenge our bodies and our breath. So as I was speaking about earlier, there's both a cognitive and a sensory intertwining in this work. One is consciously using your mind as you make granular decisions about how you're moving in space in relation to the music, in relation to the concept. Session 8, I liked we could submit songs that we liked for this week's session that helped me feel especially connected and excited. So as you can see, that was the culminating of the program. I invited the students to support the playlist. Often in Embodiology, we also have live music, which adds another layer of integration and conversation. I will also say that during the sessions, later on, probably halfway through, we do what we call audiencing, whereby we engage a concept that we call kinesthetic mapping, where the students will take turns to watch each other in performance. And they're not watching to criticize each other. They're watching to observe the choices, understand and estimate within their own sensory experience what it is that the students are having to do to achieve the outcomes. And so this was part of the community building and the sense of empathy that grew through the 8-week sessions. Next slide, please. So our conclusions. So we have noted that there is a significance in the change in the PTSD for the intervention group, but not for the other measures. Those that were engaged found the intervention helpful. They conveyed consistent variations on the concept of joy. And in fact, in Embodiology, we have a concept that we call joy as an aesthetic, that it is part of the engagement itself. And lo and behold, that also came out through their reflections. And they experienced connections to the community, even though we were not in the ideal space for doing that. We were in the virtual space, but there was still a way in which that community connection was felt. We also recognized that the recruitment process was potentially impacted by the social determinants that minoritized populations continue to carry because of historical circumstances. And we also noted that the group that participated in the interventions, we did retain those students, although all did not carry through every session. There was a sense of wholesomely as a group going through the intervention. Next slide, please. And so for the future, we are looking towards where we can go with this PTSD symptomology and burnout, and how embodiology can really be deployed to ameliorate. And then expanding that minoritized populations beyond the health sciences, that may cause us to have different groups. So we use a health focused group, a STEM group, a humanities group potentially, an arts group, and possibly look across ways. Bring embodiology back to an in-person experience to enable that enriched community cohesion and connection. And we're also looking toward partnerships with health advocacy organizations such as California Health Foundation, the California Black Health Network, or other such organizations. The movement analysis, this is very emergent and very exciting in the sense that connecting movement to states of mind in this kind of context is something that can continue to be explored. And then there is a conversation that is emerging towards an early stage NIH R21 proposal in collaboration, extending our collaboration to Dr. Downings, who's an engineer, a microbiological engineer. And I'm looking forward to creating and launching the Move Lab. Movement optimizes vitality and emotional regulation. So there's some of our ideas, and next slide, please. And here are our references, and thank you all. And returning us to Dr. Bounds and Dr. Dusek. I'm not sure if you are with this part of our conversation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. My video is not going back on camera, but that's okay. The important people are on camera. I just want to thank you for a wonderful presentation. I don't see any questions in the Q&A at the moment. I always have questions, so let me jump off with that. First off, I want to commend you for really undertaking a really important intervention that really links to a non-Eastern. So I've studied yoga, meditation, and Tai Chi for years, and the idea of really making this centered on West African population opens up a whole new connection to people. So I thank you so much for doing that, because it really can be hard to have people be interested in meditation practices on the Eastern side, and it doesn't align with their view of life. And so I think you open this up, and especially with the idea of the three components. I love the idea of the movement puzzles. I would love to check those out myself at some point in time, but that's neither here nor there. One of the questions I'll ask, and then I see one in the quick Q&A is actually more of a comment. I actually think maybe stepping back from the change in the PTSD measure and just thinking of the feasibility. So how many recruited, how many retained? So I know it's a challenge with Zoom to retain people. I think that would be the next exploration, just because I think that's way more where this should be. And this is, I do feasibility research with music therapy, with acupuncture, and we start very slowly. And so I would encourage you to just set those aside, not worry about that, because that's not obviously the goal. I mean, and you succeeded in putting together a nice intervention. And the next trick would be how to engage people in person. I think is you're spot on. So I think I would look to this as very much the cup way more than half full, maybe like 7/8 full. It's a question of how to engage people in that last eighth. But again, Zoom is a challenging thing, and I think you guys are on it. So just my 2 cents. And at some point, if you ever want to chat, I do a lot of review for NIH, and I reviewed a lot of grants, and I have some ideas that I could share personally with you as a favor. So we will get to Sarah Martin. Fantastic and important work. Thank you for sharing. 2 questions. Question number 1, I may have missed this, but were participants engaged in any other treatments, example, psychotherapy, during participation?
So we did not exclude folks who were engaged in any other treatments. And I don't think we asked. We may have that information not in front of me in terms of if they were, but we did not look at it in terms of a comparison of those engaged and those not.
Okay. Okay. And again, that's where I think the beauty of where you are, these are some things you can bring into this. So great question, great answer. Second question from Sarah Martin is any plans to expand this work to faculty? Again, I think there's stress everywhere. Just what are your thoughts there?
Well, I can confirm that during the pandemic, I actually did have a class that was commissioned by the Samueli Institute. It was called Vitality in Motion, and we ran it between 2021 and 2022. So there were 2 sessions of that, and I think it actually opened up to the entire UCs. So in terms of a study, there has not been any study of that population, but the sessions were made available and to great and similar outcomes just in terms of direct reports. So I think there's potential.
Okay. I mean, again, as a clinical trialist, I might separate the students and faculty just because it could be kind of complicated. Just I've done that with nurses and physicians and such, and just kind of work better to separate those groups. But there's no reason that faculty couldn't benefit from a program like this. Dr. Rick Harris says this is a great presentation. Thank you. I wonder if there are any characteristics of specific characteristics of individuals that might predispose them to obtain benefit or not from your intervention. So are there any characteristics, age, race, gender, levels of baseline of challenges that might help to predict who benefited? It might be too early to tell, so there's no pressure to know an answer, but
Yeah,
just
I was going to say that, Jeff, as you mentioned, it seems like another opportunity in terms of feasibility to really dig into some of the participants who, you know, engaged better, had qualitative comments that, and look at their backgrounds a little bit. We did not explore that here. Dr. Wray can probably speak to who this practice might best benefit, or I don't think there's any limitations that I'm aware of, but feel free, Dr. Wray, to chime in on that. Any pre-existing conditions that might.
I cannot say other than, not scientifically. I can't even, this is the first study where it's wholesomely been examined, but just in terms of self-reports over the last 9 years, there have been so many people who, both from the arts and people who are not people who would go anywhere near even a yoga class. Right? People who are pretty much sedentary folks who actually who came into this work during the pandemic and shared how much it created a sense of empowerment. The empowerment piece came in, and it's very diverse. And so that's one of the challenges is, which population to focus in on, because this work can respond very much to whomever is in the room. It can modify itself. For example, this summer I did a program, my summer program, which is a week-long intensive, and this included people who were from music therapy backgrounds, students, faculty members. And there was one student who was a dance student. This was at Cal State Channel Islands, and she was both deaf and blind. And this work found its way to support her and elevate the entire experience of everyone participating. And she, having done a kind of debrief with her and disability services, she began to explain how she already started to teach these techniques to people who had disabilities amongst her student population. So I just don't know that the limits exist. I think one has to have a willingness to participate and not a default mindset that this is dance. And I often don't use the term dance because it creates a barrier for people. It's movement. We all move. We all engage in gestures. And it comes down to that very basic idea of gestures. We all breathe. And so that's the entry point.
Wonderful. Donna's typing an answer to someone on asking about Canvas. I'll ask a question in the meantime. I was intrigued and really quite just encouraged by the body scan and breath work you had in phase 1, and then moving meditation, because those are a lot of times in just basic physiological parts of our mind-body interventions. Was this something and with the puzzles put together, was this something that came from the folks in Ghana, something you created? How did the intervention come together in this trifold of activities? Oops, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
To that diagram, dynamic, I didn't explain all 6 principles: dynamic rhythm, fractal code, inner sensing and balance, play and decision making, etutu, collaborative competition, audience proxemics. These are the principles that were confirmed and illuminated by the community in Ghana through their practices, through their ways of communicating, through their patterns in their culture at large, right? So from these 6 principles and staying rooted always by a connection to dynamic, as the meta principle, dynamic rhythm, I then create and continue to create ways to access these practices, to access these experiences. And so that's where the movement puzzles come from. So I'm not teaching African dance steps. It's the sensibilities, it's the deep structures through which the music and the dance emerge, if that helps.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That was a wonderful answer. We have a few more questions. Here's a typical one, so get yourself ready. How do the traditional boundaries of art, science, and spirituality both limit and expand the possibilities of this work? How do the traditional boundaries of art, science, and spirituality both limit and expand the possibilities of this work? No pressure.
I can always weigh in, but I'd be interested to know what your thoughts were.
Wow. I mean, just when I hear traditional boundaries, in particular of science, I think about so much that can limit truly measuring this work. But when I think about the other side of things in terms of expanding it, I think that sky is the limit. There's an opportunity as you spoke about Dr. Wray, and I think that's why I was silent, because you mentioned being a steward of this knowledge that comes from West Africa. And for folks that are African American descent, or African descent in general, I think that there is a connection and an opportunity to where many of us came from that allows us to connect in a new way that has not been offered in at least our country in terms of a practice. And so I just see so much opportunity with this, particularly for me as an African American woman, to connect back to West Africa.
Mhm.
But you've been there and studied it, so that's why I was being silent.
Oh, no. And these six principles, when we span out into the diaspora and we look at movement and music practices, the same principles are undergirding them, the very same principles. And the challenge of art and science is that one, science silos everything, separates, and the need to measure things and isolate is we need to develop more or newer tools that are maybe more sophisticated that can deal with the what you might think of as noise, right? Meaning research wise, there's too much like what, because that's what's real is the vibrational aspect of the music and the connection of that pitch and tone to the person's bodily systems. Those things are happening simultaneously. You take away the music, it's distorted in a way. So finding, and it may be that we just got to have bigger teams, right? That brings other expertise. And also, I think indigenous practitioners bringing their knowledge into the foreground. So I've made this commitment, I've made this ongoing dialogue, but how do we as researchers actually make a space at the table so as we're even conceiving the idea, bringing them into being part of the research design. And then I also think in terms of spirituality, that again is a challenging space, but I do know at the Samueli Institute that Dr. Harris is studying shaman practice. So there are developing modes of research that can inform and support. I intentionally did not amplify or sort of foreground rather the spiritual dimensions of the practice. However, I did observe them whilst in Ghana, and in many, many testimonials that I've received of people being in this space, people talk about the transformation and the spirituality, the spiritual transcendence that they feel when they're engaged in this work, particularly when we're in community together. So the modes of practice that one needs to develop are not ready yet, or they're emerging. So maybe this is a good time.
Yeah, I also want to just add, I think that one of the limitations that was brought up to us early on about this study in particular is that we use clinical measures. We did screening tools for depression and anxiety, and perhaps as Dr. Dusick said earlier, that was too far ahead of where this research and work needs to be. And I think that's why I'm super excited for the potential partnership to really study the meaning of the movement for that individual in terms of their mood and other feelings that they might be feeling, in particular, this concept of self-regulation. And even for me, I'm very interested in what co-regulation means. What does a space that's created do to the group in that space? And so some of Dr. Downing's work with his interest in looking at epigenetics and just as we pass on things intergenerationally, what can we pass on with this as well?
Oh, I agree. And I think, as you both just mentioned, the connection via Zoom is much more challenging. We're doing a great job now, so kudos to that. But just the idea of being in community. That was the next question was, thanks for the presentation. Did any of your outcomes provide evidence for that participants develop a sense of belonging community? So did you measure community and belonging? Maybe not, but it seems like that's a key component to consider if you haven't already. And then how might MBI, I can't speak. My mouth doesn't work. How'd your program, how is it employed on university campuses in challenging times, socially, politically, etc.? So how could it be? Because this could mean we've got a lot of things happening on campuses that are the kind of hotbed, and certainly ways to bring that heat down and something that's as acceptable as movement and what you've brought together. Have you thought more about how to expand that, perhaps?
So I'll do the first part, and Dr. Wray, I can see she's ready for that second part. We did measure collective resilience, so that was one of the measures that we included, and we saw a shift. It just wasn't statistically significant. And I will also say one of the limitations with this is that it was a really small sample, and we had less participation on that back end to really compare. And so we were interested in that collective resilience piece, and perhaps we keep measuring that because I do think that that's an important thing to look at.
And I would just offer that being in space together with people that you may have discord with without language is a building block to engaging energetically with people and seeing people and them seeing you and relating to you with a whole different set of tools as a basis to then engaging in problem solving. So in terms of readying a community to engage, I very much have seen that take place in a couple of places where we have done projects. One was with the community in Buffalo, New York. And there was a project that we developed there called About It, Accelerating Buffalo's Opportunities to Upsurge Transformation from the Inside Out. And in these contexts, we see that the way that the joy piece works, it's an enabler. It is a possibility of, in some ways, creating a relaxed sense of cooperation. And then in another setting, I have been working with students of medicine at the Montana College of Osteopathic Medicine, and they're particularly taking an interest in movement as medicine, as Dr. Frank Maskins has commented. And Dr. Frank Maskins is one of my mentors that enables me to be able to be here with any measure of chutzpah. So thank you, Frank, for all that you do in support of this work. And there are so many different forms of evidence that show us that movement is medicine. And I guess it's not pharmaceutical, so there's a little challenge there. How do we create the space of salutogenesis? So we're looking at optimizing the affordances that enable us to maintain well-being, and what are those stakes in the ground that we can foster to engineer a space where flourishing is the baseline, not pathology, and we're measuring pathology, but how do we measure that side of things?
Like it. There's 1 minute left. I just want to ask one burning question. So you had the movement puzzles, which I love, the moving meditation. Was the body scan and breath work seated, lying down, moving? What kind of process was that? Just to put the full picture in my mind.
Sure. So typically in the Zoom setting, I start with the breath work with us seated. So we start where everybody's just got off the computer, right? So we're not suddenly going, oh, we're into a whole another world. We start where you are. So we start with the breath work here. And then that breath work then shifts into movement as well. So we're really focusing on allying your breath pattern, the length, the depth, the fullness of your breath, just as I'm moving now with your breath. So then the moving meditations is simply a continuity of that.
Wonderful. Thank you. We are at time. Unfortunately, probably another 2 hours of questions, at least in my head. Thank you so much. This has been amazing. Just to let you know, our team will email all registrants the link to this recorded session. We hope you can join us in the next research webinar. It'll be in February of 2025. We don't know the exact date or who's speaking, but look for an email to register and visit our SSIHI webpage. I thank you so much. I thank you, Dr. Wray, Dr. Bounds, for an amazing presentation. And just, again, I've got all kinds of thoughts in my head, so at some point we should email each other to take a next step. But well done. Congratulations. Well done. Well done. And I thank SSIHI for funding this, because it certainly brings this to light, and it's such a great program and in such need. So thank you, everyone. We'll catch you in February of 2025. Good day.